Hey guys, it's Bryson from Frequency Co. Today we're going to have a conversation with my friend Kenyon. He stopped in the shop on his way through. They're on tour right now with Bethel, playing in Fort Worth. And so we sent him a message. We're like, hey man, come by the shop. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk tone. Let's talk guitars. Let's talk life. And so welcome.
Thanks, man. Yeah, thanks for having me. Guitars and coffee. I mean, it's hard to turn down.
It's like the worship guitarist thing.
Yeah, it speaks to my soul.
That and the black skinny jeans.
Which is funny. I've tried to loosen them up as the
Those look pretty
days
loose.
have gone by, but they, I mean, I've rolled them up a bit. They're a bit looser than my previous era.
Yeah,
So I'm slowly working my way there. I'm definitely not in the trendy LA category where they're just back to the Jenko jeans.
I'm not there.
I don't think we'll ever get there. Yours is perfect loose.
Dude, they're there. They're a little short for the boots, but we'll make it work.
Good on you.
But yeah, man, well, welcome on the show. We're just going to kind of talk, like I said, tone, guitars, life, that kind of thing. So you're originally from Texas.
Right. Yep.
So two Texas boys.
Yeah, let's go, dude. Yeah, from Denison, Texas. It's north, like roughly an hour and a half, maybe almost 2 hours from Fort Worth. But we frequented the Dallas area a lot growing up.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So how did you make it out to Bethel?
Yeah, so I was 19. I wasn't much of the academic type. I didn't care much for school, and I knew I didn't want to go to college. So I was kind of, whenever you don't want to go to college, but you don't know what you do want to do, it's kind of scary. It's just like this wide open fence to an open pasture, and you're like, what do I do? So at my youth group, though, they kind of introduced us to one of Bill Johnson's books, and also like Todd White, which I love Todd White. I know he's kind of local to the Dallas area now. But just that whole, I don't know, just things that were out of the norm from what I grew up with. I grew up in a Church of Christ, and we're just singing hymns all the live long day. And I was about 13 whenever I went over to an Assemblies of God church that I was invited to go to youth. I was like, I don't know if that's for me, but I went. Yeah. And I think they were playing Jesus Culture in the background, and I hadn't heard really anything like that. And they were playing Obsession, and it went to that first big 4 deep bass, and I was like, what is this? and so that was cool. And so I grew up more in that youth group, and like I was saying, eventually read one of Bill Johnson's books and was like, man, what is this? I really love this. It spoke to me. And then I found out they had a school of ministry, and was just like, well, that sounds awesome. That sounds up my alley. I don't know what all that means, but I think I want to do that. And started to hear more of Bethel's worship music and everything that was coming out of the church. And so when I was 19, I saved up for a year, worked at Red Lobster for a brief 2.5 months, and then moved on out there. I drove out with a buddy. He eventually came back. He just helped me do the 32-hour drive that it was, which is crazy. Awful. If you think about, if you're a parent and you let your 19-year-old son drive 32 hours across the country, it's kind of wild.
It's a haul.
I don't know if I'd let my son do that. All that to say, though, so did that, and then did all 3 years. At the start of my third year, I joined the worship team actually for worship leading. Okay. And they just kind of like as a cute thing let me on as a guitar player because I was interested in it, and didn't really have much. And they're like, yeah, sure. And led for 2 years, and then after 2 years was like, man, I really want to lean into guitar. It sounds, I don't know, in that environment, Mike Pope, Bobby Strand were playing, and it was just kind of like different in it. Yeah. To me, it was, I hadn't really heard much like it, and wanted to lean into that thing. And long story short, at least for introducing all of that, that led to like whatever. I think, I've been there for 12 years total, joined for about 9 years on the team, and here we are.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool. What, I know like recently y'all are doing the new album tour, which I'm super excited about that. We were talking like the Come Up Here album was so good. Yeah. And then was it Simple was the latest one y'all released?
It might have been. I'm trying to think. Because, Simple was not quite, it was almost, I don't want to call it an in-between album, but it was not a typical full production. I guess I also wouldn't count Moments. I think that would probably also be, that definitely came after Simple, but it's just like, that's just drawing from stuff that happened at the church, basically. So it wasn't like an intentionally catered album. Yeah. So
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. So are you playing on any other projects? Or are you mainly doing Bethel stuff? What's kind of your workflow right now?
I would definitely say mainly Bethel stuff. Living there, that's like that's priority number one. We just did a album that's called We Must Respond, and this isn't the tour for it, though. This Worship Nights tour is being called that,
Okay.
because the album's not out yet. So
Sure.
we threw in a song or two that is going to be on that album.
Gotcha.
But I think
I misspoke.
yeah, no, you're fine. No, you're technically still right. So a couple of the songs that have released as singles so far, we're doing on it.
Yeah.
So that album I think is coming out like roughly January time
Okay.
or so, and it's a hefty 18 songs. So that was a lot, and we had a very small amount of time to get it ready. So that was something. But that's the most recent big project. There is also a church in Orange County called Oceans.
Okay.
That a good buddy of mine named Colleen Veris, he used to be in Reading. We did school around the same time, school ministry.
Okay.
And where I went guitar, he went production.
Gotcha.
And he sat actually under Chris for a good few years and gleaned from him a bunch, and ultimately moved back down to family in Orange County, where he joined up with this church now called Oceans. And they've been cranking out some projects where they've been just working on some albums, doing a lot of songwriting. There's some great folks on there, man. I love them a lot. And so he pulled me on to do a recording with them 2 years ago.
Okay.
And then that was just an EP. This time around was a 10-song album.
Okay.
And so just wrote all the parts for the guitar parts for that. And at least on my side, it was with another guy named Austin Shuffett from Florida. But,
Okay.
those I would say are probably the recent bigger projects that,
Yeah.
I mean, man, they've been so fun.
Do you do like a ton of like freelance stuff where you're doing like individual songs, stuff like that?
I do. A lot comes from Matt Ogden,
Okay.
who he moved to Arizona to be with family. But man, he's a producing guru.
Okay.
I would say he's probably like my second favorite producer. Sorry, Matt, you're not number one, but definitely second, because he's somebody that whenever he hands me, whether it be just single songs to record on, or like maybe a few, it's just instant inspiration. Like
That's
the
awesome.
way he produces is so musical. It's so inspiring. It's so cohesive, and he leaves space for just like guitar and melodies and stuff. Like, it's not often you see a producer that doesn't feel the need to just like melodies and here's every single thought laid out
Yeah.
for you. Just do this, and
Yeah.
so it's like it's a very mature producer to be able to create something that feels cohesive but leaves space. And
Yeah.
he does that. So it's often with him that those like single one-offs are.
That's
being
cool.
done. Yeah.
That's really cool. What I want to kind of get into like the gear world now. So I know like you've been playing the Veritas for a while.
Yeah.
We were talking about some other possible new guitars coming down the pipeline.
Yes.
What are you rocking with right now?
Yeah, so I have my Portlander, which I've had since 2017, and it's definitely been my primary go-to. I love it so much. I've developed, I would say, like what is my familiar and comfortable sound on that.
Yeah.
I have a set of Lindy Fralin modern PAFs in there.
Okay.
Actually, it's a modern in the bridge up here in the neck,
Okay.
and that was sort of an accident because I had Pures in it originally, and I was like, well, let me try out the modern. And so I just grabbed a bridge, I threw it in there, and I was like, yeah, this is cool. And then when I swapped to the neck, I was like, this is still cool. This combo is actually kind of sweet.
Yeah.
And then Hislop wanted a pure bridge, so he just bought that one off me and threw it in his silver, I guess, blackish sparkle that he
Okay.
has with the P90 in the neck. And that's been my primary. I've developed, I guess, what I would say is my sound on that guitar. I
Yeah.
love it so much. And I've been, I had another guitar that I've been waiting on from a local luthier there in Reading. That it's sort of like an LPJ style,
Okay.
slightly extended body. It's what he calls, excuse me, it's what he calls his workhorse.
Okay.
And it's going to be another set of, I don't have a guitar that actually has pure PAFs in it by itself. So that
Okay.
one's going to have that in it. But I'm just like, we're like right at the tail end. And he's like, it's almost ready. But then it's been like 3 months since he said that. I'm like, come on, man, you're so close.
I understand
Finish your
that.
project. But aside from that, I knew I always wanted a Paleo guitar,
Okay.
but I just hadn't had a good chance to pull the trigger. But then I saw he made a post and he was like, coming up on our 100th guitar. And I was like, dude, you're 100th? And I was like, has the 100th person ordered their guitar yet? And he's like, no. And I was like, I have to be number 100. And he's like, well, it might be you or Josh, because Josh Baldwin ordered another one. And I was like, dang it. I was like, finesse the books, man. Like, I got to be 100.
Change some.
And he's like, well, if you order it like literally right now, I think it will work out where he would be 99 and you would be at 100. And I was just like, where do I sign? You know? And so it's been a lot of back and forth. But what we've landed on is, so I recently got a Danelectro guitar, not baritone.
Okay.
It was a jade green. And it was like a demo unit from Sweetwater, $420. Nothing. And it, lipstick tube pickup, the whole thing. And I really liked the Danelectro sound, but I was like, I feel like I had one time where I was recording a song and I started out on the Danelectro baritone. And I just was like, that'd be a fun challenge if I never swapped guitars. Can I record this entire thing on a Danelectro baritone from leads, rhythm, all that stuff. And so and what I found was that the lead lines were actually huge sounding. And I was like, man, maybe I should get like a guitar version of this or something. And obviously it's going to be different. The strings are fatter. And so that's going to create a different sound. But I was like, let me try a guitar version. Got a guitar version. And boy, did I find that I like lipstick tube pickups on a regular guitar. I'm not much of a Strat guy. There's something about like certain frequencies I think that can kind of build up that are, for me, just not as pleasant in Strat. I'm sure there are pickups that can sound awesome, but the lipstick tube pickup thing felt like the extension of the PAF to me, almost, where it's like the single coil version of like the PAF, where it's like buttery smooth, but it gets this like chimey cutting artifact, but it's also not like harsh on a cheap Danelectro. Granted, we changed the electronics on it just to kind of help smooth out, all of that, potential mess. But I like, and I'll still often roll the tone knob down, but I just couldn't believe the stuff I was getting from it. The choppy, punchy rhythm qualities, the absolutely soaring, cutting lead lines. I couldn't believe it, dude. So I was like, let me go with with the Paleo build. I was like, I kind of want to further explore this lipstick tube pickup thing. Sure. So all that to say, it's going to be a Telly style body, no pick guard. Okay. 3 lipstick tube pickups, 5-way switch. It's going to have a Bigsby on it. It's going to have a Tune-o-matic bridge, so similar to a Portlander build. Okay. And I want to get the Chet Atkins arm, so it's kind of like, I don't know, just like a little bit different looking. A
little more vibey.
Yeah, a little more vibey. And block inlays. Okay. Inca silver guitar paint, so it's going to be kind of like Play was following a bit of a vintage spec sheet for paint color. And there was a lot of really great color options, but whenever I saw that silver, I was like, dude, I gotta do it.
Dude, Paleo stuff is insane. Yeah. We're little teaser for all of our Frequency Co people. We're actually talking to him right now about getting some of his guitars in the shop. So I would be stoked to have some in here.
I'm sure he would be stoked to make some guitars to live in the shop, and I would be stoked to see him in here, man. I love his branding. I love where he landed with that.
It's so clean.
It's so clean.
That he did a Jaguar build recently that's super, super killer.
Yes, the black one.
Yes, the black one.
Adam East.
I love that one. I can't wait to hear it.
Apparently that paint color is a sort of metallic
black. Like the charcoal frost?
Yes.
That color is cool. There's like some really neat like early 2000s Fender colors that they were coming out with. It was like the charcoal frost, the jade green, like that have a small like cult following for like early 2000s that are super cool. Yeah. But no, that's really neat. With the Telly build, are you more of like a 50s or 60s style neck guy?
I want to say 50s. I don't fully recall. As far as like the big differences between the two, but in general, I mean, my Portlander is like a sort of modern C, not really thin, not really fat. It's kind of right in the middle. Whatever Casey originally was kind of going for, I was just like, dude, just do what you would commonly suggest, and it's what I have adapted to. Gotcha. But also, I've got like slightly bigger palms, slightly shorter fingers, and so the fat, thick baseball necks, like I just can't. Yeah. And so as long as like I'm down to fluctuate a bit on the size, but if I can't like do like a big open F chord, but wrap my thumb around to hit that low F,
Yeah.
then it's probably too big.
Gotcha.
And then it's also probably too thin if my hands are getting really fatigued by
Yeah.
pressing so hard just to try to maintain contact on
Yeah.
the fretboard. So it's that kind of middle
Cool.
of the road, yeah.
Cool. That's sweet. So mainly Danelectro and the
Dude.
Portlander.
Yeah. To present. Now, granted, I have a made in Mexico special edition Jazzmaster.
Okay.
It's white and matching white headstock. It's kind of like the paint color is more of like a car paint, sparkly, like white. It's called opal white. So it's not like an Olympic flat white or anything like that, which would be pretty sweet. But I got like a tortoise pickguard put on it and then put some Fralins in it. But I just, maybe 3-4 weeks ago I don't know if you've heard of Fralins Sunbuckers.
I haven't.
Dude. So they're humbuckers, but he describes them as like 75% single coil tone.
Okay.
And it is like, I'm not a single coil guy, but I'm kind of like inching closer in that direction in subtle variation in different ways than most dudes would just like I was saying, just like grab a Strat or a Telly or something like that. So the Sunbucker to me was like the happy middle ground where it's like I want to say it's really hot output too. If I remember the spec sheet correctly, the spec sheet said 13K output. So they're like single coily tone, really hot output.
That's cool.
And so they hit the front end of your compressor and your drives really hard. But they have all the percussive, punchy qualities of single coil, but they compress. And so they round out the top end. So it's still bright, but it's sweet. It's rounded. It's smooth. So I threw that in the Jazzmaster, and it's like, this is what Jazzmasters are supposed to sound like. Yeah. Is how I feel about it personally.
That's cool.
So I would say those three are kind of like when I'm bouncing around between the most. But that cheap Danelectro, if there's one message that could be communicated today, it's that Danelectros are sick and affordable.
I had one get away from me that I'm like still kicking myself for. It came up on like Facebook Marketplace. It was like a 90s baritone that the guy bought, played it on one record, put it in a case, put it under his bed. And he wanted like $300 for it. I should have bought it. It was like the Black Sparkle.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's good to hear that like more people are using the Danelectro stuff, because I feel like in my mind initially I was like, that's just like a studio tool. You're going to play it here and there.
Sure. Yeah.
But I feel like there's more applications for it.
There is. I do agree with it being a studio tool. It is a very good flexible studio tool that sounds good, and you can manipulate it to kind of do a lot of things. The one area where I'm hesitant, I think mostly with the baritone, is compared to, I have this Telly humbucker baritone, like Frankenstein build that I did where I threw it's like Fender's subsonic baritone neck on like a player edition humbucker Telly, and threw some pures in it, some pure PAFs. It is like the fattest, meatiest sounding baritone, and I often have to boost treble a little bit from like a random pedal. Yeah. But it's just the fattest and fullest, and it has the mid range to keep up with the big band. The Danelectro baritone lipstick tube pickup thing, when the band is big, I feel like often gets a little lost. It has certain content that doesn't quite keep up. But man, does it do the like parts. Like if a part is written on that thing, it's just like there's nothing like it. Yeah. And the tension on that long scale length of the Danelectro, it just like the tight tension on the strings is almost like a piano string. So when you dig into that thing and the tightness of the string, there's almost nothing that like harmonically rings out like those do. Yeah. So they're doing something right, man.
That's super rad. Yeah, I think we'll definitely have to get some in here.
Yeah. Dude, I mean, they're so cheap, dude. You do that, work on them, like change the electronics, keep the stock pickups.
Probably upgrade the nut. Maybe tuners.
Maybe the nut. So between metal and bone, very different experience. Some of them come with a metal nut, and it's part of the vibe. Okay. It has this bizarre harmonic howl to it that when you dig into a huge chord and you let it ring, there is this buildup of harmonic notes that it's like you cannot produce that any other way. And I think the metal nut is part of that equation. But some of them come with a bone nut and sound incredible. So it's just like I would consider that just like differences across the different versions that can be charming.
Yeah. So that's rad. That's really rad. Yeah. What about board? I know you just released the new Tone Factor series recently. Yeah. walking through boards. You and David both did. Which,
Right.
by the way, you guys should go buy that course. It is incredible. Go to
Thanks,
Tone
yeah.
Factor. Maybe we'll link it in the video.
Yeah, we'll link it. Dude, it's a lot of material. It's about 30 hours that I had to edit down from about 40 hours of material over the past like 5-6 months. And just like a slow process while he and I are both just, traveling and also doing other Tone Factor work, making presets or whatever. But it definitely, it was a labor of love. It's like a stamp in time of like our collection of knowledge, for the past, 10 years for me, probably 15 for him. And we tried to include as much as we thought was possibly valuable when it comes to pedalboards, guitars, and amps. So we're stoked on it. But yeah, the little, I guess you could call it a teaser, the pedalboard rundowns that are on YouTube, you can check that out as well. And it's funny too, man, because that video is already 2 pedalboards old for me now. So some people are like, oh, so you talked about the Mare stuff and then you just went back to Strymons, huh? That's cool. And I was like, actually, no, this is a few months old, but it took that long to just finish everything. So we'll do future run. I'll do a future rundown. David doesn't change nearly as often as I do. I don't mean to. There's cool stuff out there.
It's cool stuff. You've always got to adapt, trade.
Yeah. Or keep, just keep a shelf of pedals.
Do you trade a lot of stuff?
Not often. It's not often that somebody has something that I'm actually interested in that moment. It's a difficulty, but
I don't know if it's the DFW market, but like I get probably like 10 to 15 trade offers.
Do you take them?
If it's a good trade offer.
Yeah, right, yeah.
If maybe I'm going up in value a little bit or something like that. But I get, that's like, I don't know if it's DFW musicians specifically, but
I mean,
they just trade a ton.
Okay. Well, there's just also more people. Reading doesn't have many people.
That's fair.
And it's like 100,000 people. And so the kinds of dudes I get, I forget what I was trading recently, but it was worth a good bit more than what the guy was offering to me. I forget. It was like Earthquaker, and it was like some like octave fuzz kind of pedal. I forget what it was called, but it has no knobs. It's just an on-off switch.
Okay.
And it seemed cool, and I was like, dude, that's great. Like maybe that and this other pedal that you have, and he never responded. And I'm like, did you think you were gonna get my like $200 pedal for a $70 pedal of yours? Like,
yeah, it's not happening.
So I don't trade much. I'll just either sell something or keep it, and then just buy something new. Just based on fascination. But man, I mean, yeah, the first board iteration. It was, I mean, I'll have to look at it here actually just to remember.
Yeah, we were going to talk through like what was your first pedal board, and then like we'll compare it to right now.
Yeah, which I'll send just you the current iteration because it doesn't exist. I haven't posted about it yet because I was like, I need to get this pedal board video out before I post about this new board and show that my current pedal board rundown video is actually outdated as of the moment it released. But so man, I feel so silly about that. But okay, so original board, it was this fat Boss volume pedal, which I had until very recently. It was actually a really good volume pedal.
I think having a good volume pedal is extremely underrated.
100%. I respect that people are trying to buy back space by using the Dunlop Mini as their volume pedal. Honestly, it sucks.
Yeah, it's not a
hot take, or probably not. It's just a take, and that makes sense. But it's squeaky, and you can change the tension. But when I changed the tension the first day I got it brand new, it started squeaking, and it's like, and the sweep is a little weird. I just use it as an expression pedal.
Okay.
So it's next to my actual volume pedal, but I upgraded from this fat Boss pedal, which once again ruled for many, many years, held together. If it ever broke, it was just like these 2 simple screws, like the head of the screw popped off. You just put a new one in, and it was easy to fix, man, tried and true. But I went to a Lele volume pedal mono S, I think it's called.
Okay.
There's apparently nothing that can really break because it uses magnets to sense the sweep, and the sweep is awesome.
Okay.
So good. That was the biggest thing I was afraid of, was like, is this going to be like a weird sweep that is scary? And it's just like nothing, everything, you know?
Yeah.
And it was actually really gradual, really smooth, and it sounds great.
That's
It's
great.
not really changing or
Is
altering.
it active or?
It's active. Which, I mean, that's actually a good thought, because this Boss pedal that I had was originally technically an expression for the Vertex Boost pot originally. Because the guy that built my first board was like, yeah, you know, you won't have, you know, tone suck if you. That was the language in 2013. Is trying to avoid tone suck.
It's still going around. I get that question. Like people ask us about board builds. They're like, what volume pedal do I get tone suck? I'm like, just put a volume pedal on your board.
Yeah. It's gonna be fine. Like I think things probably would have sounded better had I just gone straight through the volume pedal. But I mean, the Vertex boost was fine.
Yeah.
But because of that, I was like, well, let me go with something active since I'm used to a technical active circuit that my volume is being run through. So I went for the Lele, and since the RJM, I've got one of those. It's in an insert loop, so I could actually turn on and off the insert loop and tested whether or not it would make it sound different. And thankfully, it didn't change in latency. It didn't change in tone. Like, at least not something that was discernible beyond 5%. That was like a big deal. It was like, this is great, and it's like built really well.
I find that like the active volume pedals are nice in eliminating the tone suck aspect of it, if that's even a real thing.
Yeah.
Like I have the old, I'm trying to think. I think I posted on Anthony Groves. I don't know if you follow him or not. I posted my board on his thing. He was like rating people's boards.
Okay.
And I have like the old Bloomery audio, like the volume pedal is like 2 inches wide and super long, but it's active and is like super smooth. And he's like, dude, what is this volume pedal that's on your board? And so I think it's like 12 years old. I swapped it for my mini Dunlop, went to that.
Okay.
And it's like,
dude, sorry for thrashing mini Dunlops a minute ago then.
Dude, I mean, some mini Dunlops are great.
Yeah.
I also have seen quite a few that like the QC is terrible on them.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Which I've also heard that about Lele. God bless them. I mean, I've had a couple folks that have gotten a Lele volume pedal that they'll be like, dude, if you had this problem, if you had this problem, and I'm like, I haven't. Like, I just got it from Sweetwater, which is probably going to be a smart thing to do just in case. Yeah. I don't know if they changed something or maybe if they went back, but there was like a bit of a QC issue going on there where I think maybe it was squeaking or having something weird with the sweep. But it's like people aren't perfect, you know? They're doing their best.
It's the funniest thing. I was at a worship set one time and the guy had a super squeaky volume pedal and it's like super low. He's doing swells, like pads only, and then you hear. So don't have a squeaky volume pedal.
Yeah.
Get some WD-40, dude.
That's what I was going to say, man. WD-40 that thing.
So you got the Lele.
Yeah, got the Lele. That's been a good comparable replacement. And it's felt good. And it's just a little smaller than the Boss. So it's like it can kind of help with that whole size factor and not consuming your whole board, but great sweep. Feels kind of, feels sturdy.
Yeah.
So that's been a fun change. But man, after that, I mean, who didn't have the M Drive back in the day? Had the M Drive on my board. Deep Six, which is fun. I mean, it was a fun place to start. Love the tone press now, though. That's what I have. And then a flashback and a Flint. The flashback was like, it's fine. It was a placeholder for sure. But the Flint, I think that's probably the one pedal out of all my pedals in history that I think I'd be fine with having back again. We were talking about it. It's a magical sounding reverb.
It's like none of the other Strymon pedals can recreate the Flint. Like the Big Sky.
Right.
Can't recreate it. I don't know if there's another pedal like it.
The way that I forget which one it is. I think the middle toggle.
So it's the 70s.
70s. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, the way whenever you extend the decay on it, there is something spectacular about it. That's so, I don't know, ghostly, but it's not super modulated by any stretch. It's just really magic sounding.
I really like it, especially if I'm playing like EG2 on a set.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll challenge myself. Don't turn on your cloud reverb. Just run the Flint.
Totally, yeah.
And so I may crank it down to the 80s because it's a little bit bigger.
Okay.
But I freaking love the Flint. The tremolo's insane in it.
Super smooth.
And now, like with the version 2 Strymon stuff, that's the Flint that I have.
Okay.
Like you can do all the presets with it and stuff like that.
I didn't realize they did that with the Flint.
Yeah, so cool. You can do, it has like the MIDI out with the TRS, so you can program presets in there.
Okay.
And then I don't know if they've released the new Nixie update where it makes it really easy to save presets and stuff like that. But
well, speaking of that, I heard the MX Nixie stuff is still a little crazy. Is that true? Have you messed with it much?
I haven't messed with it very much.
Okay. I was surprised. I feel like I've heard a couple of guys say that. First of all, your old presets can't transfer over right now. Yeah. And that it's a goal of theirs to get it there, which is good. But that they still can't really get the Nixie to like work
Yeah.
for the MX yet, which
I don't know. To me, like if I'm gonna buy a new reverb pedal, like build some new presets.
totally.
And like that's something I'm gonna go on a mini tangent here.
Let's
Like
hear
that's
it.
something that like I respect about what you and David do with your
Okay.
captures, with presets, all that stuff is you like actually spend time with it.
Sure.
You're not posting updates every 3 weeks of like, hey, here's my new reverb presets. It's
Yeah.
like the tried and true. Like whenever I'm getting board builds to work on, especially the worship guys, like I'm scrolling their presets on their Big Sky and it's like all of y'all's presets. So
Sweet.
you are
Okay.
clearly doing
Yeah.
something right.
No, let's go. That's good to hear, man. That's encouraging. Yeah, I wasn't expecting. I've had a good response even with the Maris stuff too, which has
Yeah.
been really fun. My goal wasn't to go in getting the Maris stuff like, sweet, I'm gonna make some presets, I'm gonna make some money or something like that.
Right.
It's just, I was on the fence. So whenever they first came out, I was like, that's really cool. I had a Polymoon before,
Okay.
which I love that pedal. But it's a little complex with its absolute just hidden layers, no menu, no screen. Hidden layers though, it's scary. So it's like you could be changing something you don't know you're changing. But it sounds incredible. So whenever the LVX came out, I was like, cool, it's a Big Brother Polymoon. That's sweet.
Yeah.
A little terrifying because the Polymoon was a little terrifying to navigate. Then I realized later on that it's of sorts, like a timeline Big Sky, I guess, pivot, I guess would be a simple way to put it, just to replace those. And I was curious about them, but was like, I'm super fine with what I have, though.
Right.
Then the MX came out, and then that's where I was like, oh, maybe it's time to reconsider. Of course I'm going to get the new Strymon. Love Strymon stuff.
Yeah.
But then I saw the features, and I was like, okay, it's not that it's not enough features. Like, I'd be fine with just like a couple of like meaningful changes,
Yeah.
even just like the way that it expands in stereo a little bit further beyond what the past Big
Right.
Sky did. That'd be fine. But for me, it made me go, okay, well, let me really look at what the Maris Mercury X is doing then, so I can understand the differences. And that's when I realized like what's going on with the Mercury X is the best way I feel like I can put it. On the Big Sky, you have, say, like the choral choir-esque
Yeah.
sort of setting, which is, it's a reverb. It has a choir sound where you can manipulate the different vowels and stuff. Really cool. But on the Mercury X, it has a ton of modifiers. So there's 8 different, I believe, reverb algorithms. And then there's just like a ton of ways you can modify that algorithm. So it's
Yeah.
like the choir vowel sound is one modifier. Then it's like, I'm going to add a chorus to it, or I'm going to add a vibrato to it, or I'm going to put a compressor on it, or I'm going to put a preamp saturation on it, or I'm actually going to put a tremolo on it. And then you choose like, okay, is this on my dry guitar and the effect? Is this on just the effect in pre? Is this on the effect in the feedback loop?
Wow.
Or is this on the effect post? So the effect is now catching all of that information and then hitting it, or is it just hitting everything before the delay trail? Because that has a different reaction. That blew my mind. I
Way
wasn't
over my
looking.
head.
I know. And dude, that was the hardest part, was for me to understand the routing. So I had to have them break it down, and then I had to have a guy named, you may know, Jimmy Riggs, Cordoza. He was very knowledgeable in the routing side of things, because I just didn't understand the feedback loop.
Yeah.
And so he was very helpful with that, because in short, what I've come to find is like, and the feedback loop has actually become one of my favorites, the one I didn't understand the most. If I take a chorus or a preamp saturation, put it in the feedback, the longer your effect decays and feeds back, the more it accentuates into that effect
Yeah.
and blooms into it, essentially. Wild. So,
And I'm like very old school. So
Okay.
like, and I will like transition to this here in a second, but it's like, I'm very much in the, like, well, I'll like throw up a picture of my board. It's like no background menus on my board.
love that.
So like I
How
was,
free are you?
it's honestly, it's incredible.
You're a real guitar player.
So funny story. Me and my wife just got back from our honeymoon, and I'm like browsing Craigslist looking for pedals, and I was just transitioning from like the HD 500X, which was like my second board, if you will.
Yeah.
to like, okay, I'm going to go analog. And this board came up and it was like Timeline, Big Sky. There was a tuner on it and a Morning Glory.
Okay.
And the guy wanted $1,000 for it. And it was on a pedal train too with a power supply.
Whoa.
And I remember telling my wife, like, we still had some money left over from our wedding and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I was like, these are the only pedals I'll ever need.
Yeah.
That's the biggest lie ever.
It's the biggest lie, and you meant every bit of it and had no intention of lying.
Well, and honestly, like, because I had seen everybody using the Big Sky in the Timeline, I was like, I'm going to love these. Like, this is all I'll ever need. And I think I was so fresh that it overwhelmed me.
Sure.
So then, like, after that, I think I sold them. I went to all the Walrus Mako series.
Yeah.
So I was running R1, D1, M1
Sweet,
for a while. Loved it. And then we started our dealership with Strymon. And it was Garrett Hardy and Julian were telling me, like, dude, you've got to try the Flint. You've got to try the Flint. And I was like, let's give it a shot and see. And
Sweet.
so I dumped the R1, grabbed the Flint, and I was like, this is great.
That's a wholesome upgrade. Yeah. I mean, obviously the Walrus stuff is awesome, but like we were just saying, the Flint is doing something magical.
Yeah. So now, like, my board, no background menus. And I don't know if that's because, like, I tried doing the whole Morningstar stuff and again, kind of overwhelmed me. But I'm also like a classic guy where I want 2 amps in front of me.
Yeah.
I want to turn knobs and hear the effects.
Yeah.
And I don't want to have to like pull my MacBook out and plug in and program and do all that.
Same. I'll give you that.
But,
I mean, well, when it comes to RJM too, and sorry for interrupting.
No, you're good.
There's guys on, like, every time we play a set, they've got their laptop and they're program, and I can't do that either, man. So the way I have my RJM set up is as a huge glorified looper.
Yeah.
And so it's like I can change my tempo. I can grab all my drives. I have 12 different delays, 12 different reverbs, 12 different, modulations, all laid out. That's just like, if it comes to mind, it's like, I'm going to go grab that. And I just page up and I click it. And then that's it.
Well, and I think too, like, and maybe you can speak to this a little more, like with the stuff y'all are playing with Bethel, are y'all running a ton of tracks, or is there a lot of flow moments, or kind of how is that?
Both. There are tracks, there's lots of flow. So I mean, that's a whole grand question for the guys who are running tracks. Like, man, how do you do that with something that is so open-ended?
Yeah.
That's an art in and of itself. We definitely have I'm not going to say a ton of tracks. We definitely don't have any tracks playing guitar stuff.
Right.
So unless there's only maybe one electric player, which we don't often have, would we maybe keep a complementary, e.g. stem to like play something that's like maybe pivotal.
Yeah.
Aside from that, we're just going to take all that out, and it's usually just going to be synthy stuff, maybe stringy stuff potentially, and that's about it.
Yeah. Because I think like that's the thing, because I've thought about the RJM stuff, and I've heard that it's like the easiest to program, out of like the MIDI stuff.
Sure.
But my thought process is like, in the context of where I'm playing, it's all flow. Like,
Okay, yeah.
I don't think I've played with tracks in the last 4 years.
That's nice.
It's fun, but with the RJM stuff, like I feel like it's very preset driven.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
If I may, so you're not wrong. It can be. And which I think is why I've probably caught a lot of people off guard with how I use it.
Yeah.
Because I don't use song presets ever.
That's nice.
I did for the first time on which album was it? It might have been for this recent recording, the one we were talking about, the We Must Respond. I think that was my first time ever doing song presets because 18 songs, short turnaround time. Now, granted, the programming in advance is hefty.
Yeah.
But to be able to make any amount of complex changes from one reverb and one delay to another, as well as changing the drive, as well as changing the modulation with one button press is handy for a recording.
Yeah.
So it's like you can focus on playing guitar and that's it. You just push the up button. That's not a bummer. But that being said, for everything outside of a recording like that, I've opted for what I call the glorified looper.
Yeah.
Which is I have my main page and it's just all my drives boosts on bottom. And then if I page up, it's my Mobius. And so it's like I know, and it requires some memory.
Yeah.
Bottom left is like widening effect. If I click and hold it, it's an even wider effect.
Wow.
If I click the second one, it's my tremolo. If I click and hold it, it's my fast tremolo. If I hit the next one, it's my light destroyer. If I click and hold it, it's my chorus. And then after that, if I go underneath from my main page, it's all my reverbs.
Okay, gotcha.
And then it's like if I click the first one there, it is, and I've tried to simplify the process a bit. It's preset 1. If I click and hold it, it's preset 2. Next button, tap it, it's preset 3, and so on and so forth.
Sure.
And then same thing with delays, and then same thing with all of my other MIDI capable pedals I made a page for.
Okay.
And it's like I'm not always going to all of them and just tap dancing the whole time,
Yeah.
but it's there if I want it, which has become valuable for the sake of flow, because I'll create stuff at home that I'm like, man, that's really cool, and it's right here behind this button.
Yeah.
And when we're just kind of sitting there figuring out where we're going or what we're doing, sometimes it's like it feels like it's like the Lord is just kind of like, you remember that thing? And I'll be like,
you need that texture.
Yeah. And it's just like, go do it. And it's like, but how would that fit? And he's like, just do it.
Just do it.
And then so I'll go and grab it. And then sometimes some of the most profound things happen leaning into that weird effect that it's like, where would I ever possibly use this?
Sure.
Which is, it to me, is a special thing within what we do.
Yeah.
That it's like most other folks would just try to create something maybe in different genres. And it's just like, that's weird. I'll never use it. And then they never do.
Yeah.
And then for us, it's like sometimes you back pocket these tools that you just have no idea what you're going to do with it until the moment arises. And you're like, I have this thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's special to me for that reason, to have access, even if I don't use everything within a set. That's sometimes a tendency. It's on your board, so you feel like if it's on my board, I must use it every single set, or else I'm a poser, and and I'm just trying to pretend like I need all this stuff, and it's like not true. The plumber doesn't need every single tool for every job.
True.
But he's got them just in case.
Just in case. No, I like that. I like that approach with the RJM stuff because I feel like you're getting more out of it rather than just hitting a preset.
Totally.
And it kind of is what it is. I feel like too, like that's maybe one of my biggest struggles with the guitar community at times is it's just copy and pasting what another player does.
Sure.
But like being able to grab, different like off the wall effects that you're doing.
Yeah.
For different moments, and like just having the sensitivity to do that in a moment, I think is really cool, and like set yourself up for success, and like maybe invest in the weird pedals and try like the weird stuff. Like for me right now, like the Chroma console is like, if I'm ever getting bored, I'll go jump in that pedal and just find some weird stuff. Like I'm working on like an octave preset right now with it, and I'm like, just to throw something in there a little bit different, or
Totally.
I think that's cool that you're utilizing it that way, where it's not, one button, jump to a preset, and you get what you get kind of thing.
And there's something beautiful about having your tried and true go-tos, your crutches, if you will, because they make you a consistently strong player, and I would say that's the most important. If your stamina is important in what we do. But for your sake, I think it is important to have those things that are just different and wild and experimental. One thing that was really funny that I did recently that blew my mind, it was a complete accident. I made a preset on the Maris Mercury X to reverb, and it came off of a primary one that I'm using almost 24/7, which that one as well, a little bookmark, was a weird accident as well. I went into the filter option where you can EQ, and I turned up 5K by 10 dB.
Okay.
Why would that sound good? And it created the most harmonically rich reverb I've ever played in my life. I don't know if that was the intended result for them. Maybe it's where I positioned it and the way the reverb is catching it, because it might have been in pre going into the reverb. I don't fully remember. But it's just the most harmonically rich reverb I've ever played. And if I do a swell, like every time I do it, I'm like, how is this making this sound? And so the fact that it draws me in that much is really inspiring, really fun. But I made a different version where I compressed it so much where it's just squeezing the reverb, not my guitar, the reverb. So it is very reactive. And so I intended for it to be like a really big, I called it anthem. It's a huge lead, like lots of gain, lots of volume pushing through my pedal board into the amps. And it's a form of compressor on it called compressor link. It compresses the center information more.
Okay.
So it wraps around the outside. And the more volume you push through it, the more it gets out of the way. That was the intended effect. But I've found myself actually using it more as a very ambient, washed out reverb, because when I'm playing really gently, it requires a ton of volume to push it out of the way.
Yeah.
So when you don't do that, it consumes your guitar if you play really lightly with a clean amount of information. And it's compressing so much that one time the congregation started to cheer, and their voices started feeding back through my guitar into the reverb, and it got louder the louder they got. And so they became this harmonically rich choir through the PA, through my guitar. And so they got louder because of that, because of what it was doing. And I've just never experienced something so organic as that. And I just left my guitar open, held the notes that I was holding, and their voices just continued to feed back through it. And as they ebbed and flowed, it did the same for me. And I was just like, well, I can't believe this is happening right now. What a wild, unintended effect. Like, I could have never intended to do that. But especially in modern music, like with what we do in worship music, our amps are in another room. Yeah. Feedback's not a thing. The PA's pointed away from you, and it's like usually 10 feet in front of you or something. So it's like that shouldn't have happened. So wild. So
weird
cool
stuff.
Yeah.
So I like where we're going with this, amps.
Yeah.
I feel like that's like
controversial.
It's controversial.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel very old school where I'm like, play live amps. Please, for the love of God, play live amps.
I think most dudes, I say most dudes, probably not. It depends on how swiftly the new generation is arising. The one thing that I'll say that's positive about modelers is it is the threshold for entry is lower, I feel like, which can be positive. Dudes who wouldn't have been able to consider it can now consider trying stuff because they can practice with headphones. Yeah. And they can develop good habits. And I'll call it good habits because even with, like, I'm in an apartment and I have 2 amps in stereo sitting in front of me, I'm practicing lightly. Yeah. Because I can't blow out myself and the neighbors and just make our eardrums bleed. So I have to play really quietly at bedroom volumes. And so now I'm practicing and setting tones at bedroom volumes. Yeah. And that develops bad habits because that does not translate live. You need to dig in, and your compressor is not going to be set correctly because your compressor is going to be set at playing quietly. So whenever you go live and you dig in and it's just squeezing everything down to that level, and you're like, what is wrong? And so it develops bad habits. So modelers and being able to play with headphones was actually very helpful for me in my growing process, strictly at home, for digging into my guitar without any negative ramifications. Yeah. Thankfully, we had the church where we only play on amps, so the tonal aspect was developed there, but the good habits for digging into drives and everything at full volumes happen on modelers. So there's a bit of a give and take to both realities, unless you have a isolated environment for amps 24/7 at all times. Great. Yeah. Most folks don't. Mm-mm. And so, the amps will always be my first choice, but there are positives about modelers like that. Or, we were talking a bit about it earlier where we're in South Africa and we were there a couple weeks ago, and we went last year as well. And there was some gnarly amp situations. The blessed rains of Africa were coming down upon us, and the amps were under the stage, like on like little wheeled risers in the mud. And so we're like getting down under the stage, trying to set these amps. And it's just like, this sucks on many fronts. Yeah. The amps thankfully sounded decent. There was an AC30 and something else, I forget. So it's like, that's great. But a guy, Cam Pablo, plays with Gable Price and Friends. Yeah. He was with us. And his amps just weren't working. They were just actually broken. So he had to use an ACS1. And it thankfully was like, it was decent. I like the ACS1. It's cool. Like, where else do you get stereo amps in that small of an enclosure? That's really cool. But it's not my favorite tonal choice. I prefer, I at that point in time preferred at least the Iridium. But since Tone X's have come out, I've really come to prefer them. If you capture the amps right, I can get what feels almost identical tone to my amps. Yeah. And my greatest example of that excuse me, is the project that I worked on with Ocean's Music that I was talking about earlier. I recorded all the demo stuff on my Tonexes just for the sake of not using tube life and like just communicating a quick message to the producer basically. And when I went back and then tracked everything on amps at home, I used the same amps that I captured on Tonex, but the real version. And I was like, this will be fun. Let's see, the differences. And the differences were subtle. And I was very surprised because the cleans were actually really punchy, really forward, really full sounding on Tonexes.
Yeah.
And there wasn't anything that I felt was necessarily lacking comparing it to the real amp. And I was like, okay, I was ready for there to be a lot more of a difference. But a lot of the big differences came from when you really push the amp really hard. The amp definitely opens up, I would say, another 10-15% from where I captured it on Tonex, where you get the top end artifacts, you get the full breakup, you get there is a 3D aspect to the amps that just comes forward at you a little bit more. That's where the biggest difference came from, was in that end result. So
how are you setting your amps? Are you setting them super clean? Are you doing the classic edge of breakup? I know now there's a lot of people setting amps like super, super dirty.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Man, what a good question in current era, like you're saying.
And I'll say this to my ear, I feel like you set stuff really clean, which I like that.
Yeah.
But I feel like is maybe slightly controversial right now.
Man.
So I want to hear your thoughts on it.
No, it's a good question. I would say maybe 2-3 years ago, I was setting stuff a lot more, not aggressive. It was always edge of breakup for me. And I was erring on the slightly more aggressive edge of breakup. For instance, like if I played really lightly, it was clean. But if I played medium and hard, it was breaking up. And that was fun for the way I was setting things at that point in time. But kind of, I was telling you guys earlier, off camera, that the more work I've done with Greeley as the mix engineer, it wasn't him telling me to clean things up necessarily. It was me hearing the final result of what I thought it was, that I thought my clean tones were, versus the actual outcome of his incredible mix. Was just like, I know his mix capability. I've heard all this stuff that he does that I love. And what I was hearing in my head is not what translated. Okay, I can go a little cleaner to accomplish what I know I want to accomplish. And so I've opted for more of it's a subtle change.
Yeah.
I dig in really hard and it breaks up a micro amount. You still hear that breakup, but it's just teetering on the other side of the fence. And so now it's like I play lightly, it's clean across the board. But if I dig in really hard, because I am a dynamic player, if I dig in really hard, it breaks up just a little bit. And then I found I can turn on my first gain stage, and it can add the artifacts, it can add the EQ and the slight compression that my first gain stage does, but it can still be appropriately clean. But if I lean into it, let's say a medium to heavy amount, it leans into the amp's breakup.
Yeah.
And so it's just been a fine defining process of exactly what I want it to do with the amount that I lean into the amp, essentially.
Yeah.
And that has been the sweet spot for me, because I can get my really nice, super compressed, clean tones, but I can get the soaring, screaming leads when I wanted it. It is within access. But I've found a ton of value in the clean tone. And one thing that's been very fun in my most recent board build that Paleo did probably 3 weeks ago, right before tour, added Pog 3, which that's fun. Man, that's fun. That's a fun pedal. It's a lot of MIDI and expression capability. It's a whammy and a Pog in one now. So, I mean, there's so many things you can do. But also added the Warm Audio WAC1 chorus vibrato pedal that just came out. And they sent me that and the 1176 that they just released, compressor pedal, to make some videos on. So made some videos, and honestly, wasn't expecting to love the chorus vibrato as much as I did. I knew I've been looking for a pedal like that.
Right.
But wasn't expecting to love it as much as I did. It has the actual classic BBD chip in it. And your tone, as long as you're running through that pedal, you're always running through that preamp. It's always on. There's no ability to turn off that preamp, essentially. So there's a level that can attenuate or boost into that preamp that saturates it more. And so I've almost this entire tour, I think never turned it off.
Okay.
You can turn the effect off, but like I said, you can't turn the preamp off. And so I've left my tone almost always going through it, because the way that the chorus works, it's like a sort of classic throwback where it's modulating more heavily on one side and the other side is modulating a very small amount.
Sure.
It sounds so wide.
Gotcha.
And that wasn't the intended reason why I got that pedal, but it sounds like I'm double tracking while playing live.
Okay.
And not in a cheesy way or a phase shifting way, but just like the way it reacts. And when the effect is on, depending on how hard you're hitting that preamp, so since it's after all my drives, so I can accomplish stereo, they slam into the front end of that thing and it almost explodes.
Okay.
And when the effect is on, it's almost like moving around like this.
Okay.
And so it's just, it sounds like you're double tracking live. And it also rounds out my tone in a way I've never heard any other pedal do. And so it's been the most charming addition to my board that has made me feel even more comfortable with like my first gain stage, and sometimes a boost is my biggest gain stage, which is crazy. Like,
yeah,
I wouldn't have supposed, but the way it compresses makes it sound bigger than the big wall of sound, lots of drive thing.
Yeah.
And it's been feeling awesome.
That's
so
neat.
one gain stage and a boost for the past tour, really. You know?
That's really
Crazy.
cool.
Yeah.
I think like there's something about those like preamps that are in those pedals. I was listening to Julian at the studio, and he plugged in like one of the old Memory Man, like original Memory Lands, turned off like all the time-based stuff, and just like cranked it and was using it as a preamp.
Yeah.
And it sounded insane.
Totally.
And I'm leaning directionally more towards like preamps for drives.
Yeah.
And then like maybe having one drive pedal that you stack with that.
Totally.
Versus having 15 different overdrives for 15 different flavors.
Yeah, right. That's which is funny because I have so many drives on my board right now because I was very much in that state of mind even just a year and a half ago where I had the Lauren Audio Mustang, which I love that thing so much. It's a 1073 Neve in a box preamp basically. And so I've gone all the way from like using it as like a heavy saturated boost because the tone knob, it does brighten the pedal a little bit, but it's more so a like harmonic saturation knob.
Gotcha.
Where it gets more like saturation and grit than it does like actual like tone, and it's different than the gain knob, very different. And so I'll use it like in post as a saturated boost. I'll use it before all of my drives as an always on, just like light preamp boost that just makes the size of my guitar feel huge. But then I would have like the overdriver and then my Solo Dallas classic pedal and then, you know, like the Solo Dallas Storm and then the Case Study Effect Aspen and now the Twilight Pulse Audio Works Constant. And it's just so many drives.
Yeah.
And I love it. I do still use all of them. But the preamp and the way it's interacting with my board is simplifying things in a very musical way that it's been so sweet. So I'm with you, man. It's like I don't want to overcomplicate my board. I do like having all the tools if I need them, but there is something to be said about the like really good preamps.
Well, and I feel like preamps going, especially if you're running digital amps, I feel like is a must-have.
Totally.
Like whenever I have to run Tone X, I'm like, the Benson preamp has like been on my board for 3 years and it's my always on. I set it pretty clean, but it just adds like that. I don't know if texture is the right word, but it just adds that organic feel to the digital amps that to my ear at least feels a little bit more natural. Yeah. Because as I'm like digging in, it's breaking up more. Yeah. As I'm playing clean, staying clean.
Well, you know what's interesting is one time there was something that I handed Greeley. It wasn't an official like recording of something. I think it was just like maybe some sort of demo something, and I was like, hey, what do you think about this? Because I was doing it on an Iridium, and I was like, can you see like what kind of information do you see that's EQable and like kind of like to a normal amp? What are you seeing here?
Yeah.
And he goes, your clean tone, it's like he was saying that he had to use more EQ to be able to add constructive EQ to that made a real difference. That wasn't just noise. And similar with deconstructive EQ. But he said when you turn on your first gain stage which at that time was the Benson preamp, he said it was almost normal amp information. Interestingly. So the preamp added almost normal amp information that was like harmonic characteristics throughout the EQ spectrum that he was able to grab that made more. I mean, think about it this way too, like whenever you're running a lot of different amp modelers and you try to EQ them, sometimes you can turn up something 6 dB and it's like, it's not a very dramatic change. It didn't do a lot. That's kind of what he's referring to, where it almost just gets like noisier. It's just more like kind of noise rather than just straight up information, EQ, like raw information. And so yeah, adding that Benson preamp made there more information exist, that when he moved the EQ around, that it actually modified the tone. So it's super interesting to speak to that whole importance of like, dude, a good preamp pedal literally adds artifacts that make a difference on modelers.
Yeah.
So
that's cool. I think too, kind of as we're wrapping up, like one thing that I've loved about this conversation is like how much you're talking about you're going to Greeley, picking his brain on stuff. I feel like as a guitar player, like go to your front of house guys, go to your broadcast engineers, go to the people you're recording with, and like get their feedback and actually take it.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes with guitar playing, we can, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the best way. Like basically tell them like, you know, I'll say it this way.
I think I know where you're going with,
You wonder why you're getting buried? It's probably because
it's probably because you're not friends with your front of house engineer. Yeah.
So like talk to them and actually find out what sounds good to them. Like, of course, dial them where it feels inspiring to you, but like be willing to give a little bit. And I love that you're doing that and like sitting down and like looking at, okay, how is this EQing? How is this sounding? Even like being able to set stuff so clean, but do like all the compression and EQ changes at the end with the Mara stuff. It's opens up a totally different world to recording things like that, where I think you can get a really nice, fine, product.
Yeah, it is. It's super important that usually my approach with it is I dig my heels in and I find what's inspiring to me first, and I find like I fuse with that thing. Then I'll go and check with somebody like Chris, and I'll send him something like, how does this come off to you? Because it's important, I think, that it feels good to me and that I feel it, because feel communicates a lot more. And then I'll send something his way and be like, dude, how does this sound? Like, how does this come off? How does it translate? Whatever.
Yeah.
And any bit of information I'll get back from him that's where I'll then make those subtle constructive tweaks based on what he says. Sometimes it's nothing, but sometimes there's like, ooh, this little thing, like that I would never be able to know.
Yeah.
He brings up, and then I'll make that subtle tweak that way. But I mean, feel is important. You being able to communicate something and you're convicted of what you're communicating is like 10 out of 10 important.
Yeah.
And then tone is definitely second to that. An example is for Come Up Here. One particular line on The Great Beyond, on the choruses, I demoed something out on the Iridium and sent it to him, and I was like, dude, what do you think of this? He's like, great, threw it in. No biggie. It was awesome. And then we actually record that day, and I was doing some like sort of like ambient vocal stuff and playing on the chorus. And I simplified the line I was playing so that it didn't do this in my brain and, just fry it while trying to sing and play a different melody at the same time. And in the end, when the album came out, I listened to the stem and I was like, he used my freaking Iridium take. And he said, yeah, it felt better.
That's funny.
And I was like, I know what you mean. I know what that felt like when I played it that time.
Yeah.
It felt different. The lines, the notes I chose felt different. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I'm just surprised you did that. And he was like, yeah, it had feel and the other one didn't. So interesting.
Yeah. I feel like it's coming up more, like musicians think like a mix engineer, think like a producer. Like, how does it fit in the mix at the end of the day? Yeah. Sure, it's a cool pedal, but does it fit in the mix well?
Right.
And how are you carving it to make it fit in the mix? What do you like if you're a guitar player, like what are you saying to them to be like encourage them to think like a producer? Like, where does your mind go with that mindset?
It's a good question. I mean, find your style of music that moves you when you listen to it and moves you when you play it. If you're just trying to fit a mold for somebody else, it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
Because you're not convicted of the thing that you're playing. When you are, then, it'll move you. It will likely move them as well as the listener. And then in part will often translate incredibly well in the music and in the song you're playing on. And so that can't be true for everybody. Sometimes maybe they're a session musician, maybe they are fitting a mold, and that's totally fine. But find your way to have conviction within what you're playing, so that the communication and feel is communicated. That is top priority, at least to me.
Yeah.
Because then after that, there will likely just be subtle tweaks for it to fit in a production standpoint, unless the part just doesn't fit at all, or the tone doesn't fit at all, or something like that. They'll communicate that. Usually that's an easy thing to shift, but I would say that's at least usually the thing that's most important to me, that I try to communicate.
That's cool. I guess too, like what you're talking about with feel, playing what inspires you. What is that music right now? What are you listening to?
Good question. It's funny, like, we play so much, I often silence is very helpful. Not to say that I don't listen to anything ever. I'd have to just look through my Spotify, but it's like, I love Coldplay, classic answer. In particular, I love Ghost Stories. I love all the different sounds Coldplay has done, but Ghost Stories, there's something very odd about it, kind of off the cuff about that particular album that was just like, I love edgy stuff. Mute Math is fun, great tones, gnarly parts that fit really well with like what I love. An easy answer to me as well, I guess, is Surveyor, but they only a lot of the stuff that Bobby's been doing lately on Surveyor is different than what it was when him and Greeley and some of the other guys were doing it, where it's like just that one album. XI was just like, there's really nothing like it. That's a frequent for me that I go back to and listen to for just like, what's my North Star, I guess I would say, is like that. But yeah, I mean, it kind of bounces around and stuff kind of in that category, kind of edgy, kind of cleaner, kind of, Mute Math, I feel like, is a fun description of it. We actually chose one of the songs, Typical, to sound check.
Okay.
And it's fun. It's just like, I hadn't heard that song in such a long time. And I was just like, dude, this sounds like me. I feel like this is me. Like, this is really cool. I like it. It's really big stereo. I mean, they probably double tracked it or something. I don't know. But just kind of edgy, but great cleans and like cool parts, cool melodies, weird stuff that kind of makes you tilt your head when you hear it. Like, I love that.
Yeah.
So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, dude, it's been fun chatting.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming in the shop and hanging out, and hopefully we can do some more videos in the future.
I imagine so. You're around this neck of the woods, back where my family's at. I assume we'll do it again.
Yeah, for sure, dude. Well, thank y'all for checking this out. To see more content like this, make sure to like and subscribe. Follow us on social media, YouTube. Go follow Kenyon on Instagram and YouTube and Tone Factor and everything else he's doing. He's crushing it. So,
thanks, man.
Awesome.